Welcome back, everyone. Hope the break went well. By the time I got out there was no more coffee. So I'm doing the English thing, and I drank a tea. I don't know if that works. Can anybody testify if that is? Yes, it works? Okay. You'll find out in a couple minutes. So this is the second half of the session. I was asked to remind you all that we have a hashtag, which is GConvert16. Did I get that right? Okay. So if you're interested in sharing some things, please use that hashtag. Apparently we were trending yesterday, and we're not today, so everybody's really disappointed. But you can help fix that issue. So as I mentioned, the first half of this session in the morning was me just sort of sharing some of my recent thoughts, things that I've been looking at in terms of trends on design and on the market side of what's happening in mobile. The second half here is a lot more about answering specific questions you all have. To do that, I have lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of slides. In fact, there are many such decks currently open on my laptop. And if you're wondering how the heck I can find anything in here, that's a really good question. I don't know the answer. You'll probably see me stumbling a bit and jumping through here to try and find some things that answer your specific questions. But hopefully we can. So with that in mind, there is a blue googly box. And let's open it up. Anyone have something they'd like to discuss? Okay, here we go. Ready? Oh.
Great.
Thank you.
I was really interested about the how cheap part of the screen and talking about websites. A lot of time, upper left is the logo, which is also used for home button.
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to solve this, considering that this is now almost a standard?
Yeah, almost a standard. Let's talk about that first, and then let's come back to other things. So one of the things that people will always bring up, and let's see if I actually have this, which is if everybody starts to use the hamburger menu, right? If every single company and app and everything out there uses it, won't everybody learn it? And then we'll be done, right? If we all just use it consistently, then everything will be glorious. To which I always like to call out some of these examples. You know, if everybody would just use the save icon consistently, it would be good forever. Until you're no longer saving to a disk that looks like that, until you're no longer saving anything. And even when there's symbols that are quote-unquote universal, such as this, right? That clearly means search, doesn't it? Who thinks that means search? Okay, who says it means something else? It really depends, right? Here, yes. Here, no. So it's challenging to think that any single kind of convention will just get so widely adopted and will be done and perfect. It just doesn't ever work that way. I love this quote from Bruce Sterling, which he's a science fiction author and he turned design professor, so it's an interesting mix. But he says, humans are continuously changing from cradle to grave. So any solution built for humans needs to similarly continuously be changing. And he has this great phrase that goes, design is never done, which I think is very true, especially when you look at the kinds of iterations we've had over the years on everything. But to come back to the what do we do about these conventions that are on the web? Let me pull something up real fast to address it. Turns out I need another deck than all the ones I have open. Sorry about that. Now you can see how slow my machine is. There we go. Okay. So Here we go. This is our friends at eBay, and they had a couple different mobile experiences. They had an Android app, they had an iOS app. This was a long time ago, as you can see. They had a mobile web app, and all these things were kind of the same, but different. Right? They had mostly the same features, but not really. They had semi-similar organizations, but not really. They had semi-similar designs, but not really. And when we looked at how can we actually make this work across multiple screens, we kind of took a look at what could a native app experience look like, what could a web browser experience look like, and how can these things actually function. And the net here, if I come back to this, is inside of the web browser, you can maintain some of the conventions that make the web work, like a navigation up at the top, maybe the logo to represent where you're at, which could also serve as a doubling of the home button if you need it. And then on a native application, you can use patterns like the bottom navigation bar to align with that sort of high-level convention. But the organizational structure is the same, right? Search results look the same. It's home, search your eBay, home, search your eBay. And so despite the differences in the platform, where we may change like where we place navigation to align with what people expect in a web browser versus what they expect in an iOS app, those things may change, but a lot of the other stuff basically stays the same. Does that answer your question? You guess so? Okay. Which part is not answered?
It's a convention, and so people expect, some people at least, expect it to be there. And if they do not find it there, probably they do not find it at all. Because sometimes if it's not where you expect it to be, it becomes invisible. Mm-hmm. And so maybe we just need to try and experiment and see what is best.
Yeah, that's expectations play a role, and based on what people have seen to date. But like I say, small changes between platforms can help you meet those expectations, right? You don't have to blindly push a singular design pattern everywhere, regardless of what the conventions of that operating system are. You can make adjustments such as these to make the same service work on the mobile web browser and a native application as well.
Thank you.
Cool. Let's throw it down here. Nice. 2 for 2.
I work for Ziggo, broadband company in the Netherlands. Mm-hmm. 6 years ago, we had a mobile website. And then 4 years ago, we thought that we needed to develop a responsive website to be mobile first. So now I'm wondering where this responsiveness and responsive design is in comparison to mobile website, if you have any advice on that.
Yeah, let's take a look at something like that. So, let's hope that has something I'm looking for. Oh no, that has a bear on a tightrope. Sorry. That is not what I was thinking of. If you'd like to see a bear on a tightrope, though, I'm happy to talk about that too. It's a great, funny story, actually. So I'm going to answer that question by talking a little bit about what do we mean necessarily by mobile. And let's see if this has that slide. Close. I'm so close. Okay, one more deck. This is where I apologize in advance by the fact that I have way too many slide decks and way too many slides inside of here. And you get to see how the sausage gets made. But effectively, the variances that we see in mobile devices and in desktop devices and in tablet devices and in all devices mean that whatever we build for any platform should be built with quote-unquote responsive characteristics so that they work across a wide range of screen sizes and have good overflow capabilities to fill whatever size device you happen to have. So whether it's a mobile site or a desktop site or a tablet site or a site that serves all of those continuously, I wouldn't build any of them without some element of responsiveness.
So should the responsiveness be like a basis? Like getting the
Well-
basics right is having responsive behavior and then optimizing on that?
If you just put HTML inside of a web browser, it is default responsive, right? It will actually flow to fill the screen however you like. It only stops doing that when you do things to prevent it from doing that, like putting in fixed pixel sizes and all those sorts of things. So the default for any of these experiences is that they are responsive. And when it comes to things like this, this is one of the slides I was looking at, right? Even if you just look at the one manufacturer, Samsung, one lineup of their devices, Galaxy, here's kind of what you see. There's the Note 10, the Tab 3 10, the Tab 2 10, the Tab 10, there's the Note 8, the Tab 7, the Tab 2 7, the Tab 3 7, there's the Mega 5.8, the Mega 6.3, the Note 3, the Note 2, the Note 5, the S4 Active, the S4 Nexus, the S4, the S3 IV, the S4 Zoom, the S4 Mini, the Ace 4, the Ace 2, the Fame 3, the Ace 3, the Young 3. And I know what you're thinking, like what the hell is going on between 8 and 10 inches? Because it's very un-Samsung-like to leave an entire inch between Galaxy devices. I think since they have filled this void with an appropriately sized device, but the point is, regardless of what you're building, you have to account for all these different types of device sizes. And so the way I define a responsive design is media queries, fluid images, and fluid layout, right? So a fluid grid, media that sort of is fluid as well, whether it's images or videos, and changing things up based on where the layout breaks to make sure that it actually works effectively. And so I think that baseline you need across anything you make, if you serve one solution or not. And do you serve just a mobile-first design and scale it up? That tends to be a good practice because the reason why you do things let me see if I got a nice image of this, kind of bottom up, is because you ensure that you get a great experience on these smaller screens and on lower bandwidth networks and all those sorts of areas. Generally, if you try to start with a large screen experience and scale it down, you're going to make a much worse small screen experience. Right? So it tends to be better to start with the small screen because you make it work there. It forces you to focus. You don't have all the screen space to fill with stuff, and then you can gradually treat screen size as an enhancement. Like, I got more room. What else should we add here? How can we make this better based on virtue of more space? So in general, I think that is a better methodology. But yeah, there's this whole deck is on responsive design. I'm trying to find like the 2 slides that are good in it. But I can't, so. Does that answer the question, though?
So,
Yeah.
okay, one more.
Yeah.
If responsive works well,
Yeah.
should you then look at optimizing for a mobile website?
We'll define optimizing. You mean like making a separate mobile website?
Yeah, for example?
I wouldn't. I think you've already got enough work to just make things work on the web, much less having 2 separate websites versus, also having native apps and trying to do something on a TV or on a watch or God knows what else, right? All those platforms will drive you crazy. And so I think it's a much more scalable solution to just say, I have something built for the web. It works across anything that accesses the web, and it adapts to whatever environment it's in, and I'm done. Right? Which is also how I would advise building native apps too. If you look at native applications, the same variety of screen sizes and resolutions applies as well, and you have to build something that works across all those devices too.
Thanks.
Yep. Next, kind of far away, we throw it over there. While we're at it, though, I'll actually show some interesting responsive design stuff. So a lot of times people say, well, with the responsive site, I just have to make it one thing, right? I can only make one thing and have it scale across the board, and how does that work? And sometimes the answer is, doesn't work so good, right? So if you look at the Boston Globe site, which was one of the early responsive web designs, it's a big, nice desktop thing, and then it gradually flows into smaller screen sizes, and then it comes into this sort of tablet-ish size, and then it comes more into a phablet-ish size until you get to mobile size. But like here on mobile, scroll, 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 scroll. Phew. Is that really a great mobile web experience? No, it's just a desktop site smushed down into a big long thing. And you don't have to make experiences work like that. You can actually create some adaptation, and there's techniques that you can use, especially now with things like Flexbox, where just because you have a certain information hierarchy on a large screen device doesn't necessarily mean you have to maintain that same ordering, that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, when you get down to smaller screen sizes. So you've got the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but when we get to real small size, we can go and change it to 1, 3, 4, 2, 6, 5. And why do you care about that? Well, let's say you have something like a children's museum, and you know, based on looking at your logs, that people who access your children's museum website tend to be trying to figure out when are you open, how do you get there, and really want to come there. So on all platforms, you see people going to these pages, but in particular on mobile devices, you see that there's an increased amount of usage of the find us, see our hours kind of use case, which is cool. So what you can do is, on a small screen, have those elements front and center to meet those use cases really clearly. And then as you scale that experience up, and by the way, everything is still on there, so there's a full menu. But as you scale that experience up, you can see we'll just sort of gradually reduce the visibility of the contact us, find us, and instead emphasize like what's happening at the museum and reasons you might want to go. That information hasn't gone away, right? It's still accessible to you. Just like when you are on the small screen size, you can still see all the things that are happening at the museum. We're not removing that. We're not saying, you're using a mobile device, so we're not going to tell you what's happening at the museum. And when you use a desktop, we don't say, we're not going to tell you how to get here, right? That's sort of silly. But what we can do with this moving around kind of structure that I showed you is emphasize certain things on certain form factors that we know are more or less important to people. And so a quote-unquote responsive site doesn't mean it's just one blanket thing for everybody shoved to fit whatever size device they have. It can be something that's actually informed by usage and supports all kinds of screens. Okay, that was semi-tangent, but I hope related. Who got the blue thing? Yes?
So in the presentation before the break, you were talking of all these large companies moving their hamburger menu to a bottom menu. So they do this in apps, but do you understand why they don't do it on their mobile websites?
Why don't they do it on their mobile website?
Yeah.
I think a lot of them actually do some elements of it on their mobile website. The problem with bottom positioning things inside of mobile web experiences, let's actually take a look at that, is twofold. While inside of a native application, there's all of these system controls that allow these things to work effectively in a bottom bar, right, inside of a native app. There's patterns for this, what have you. You can go and actually implement a more tab. All these things come as default. When you try to fixed position things inside of the mobile web, it's a little bit more complicated. Nowadays, this is an older picture of a web browser, but nowadays mobile browsers tend to hide their navigation bars, but they still have them at certain points. When you scroll, they go away. So one of the things that you hit is a reduced screen space. So if you've got your nav down here and you've got something up top and the browser has something up top and the browser has something on bottom, you're really squeezing the amount of content you can show due to those like double nav systems, if you will. And fixed positioning support for a while has been spotty across different platforms. So while within a native platform, it's like a hand-built component, it works great, there's thousands of man-hours put into it. On the web, when you looked across Android, you looked across Safari, you looked across BlackBerry, you looked across other browsers, the ability for you to fixed position lock something to the bottom of the screen was just not great. And so since your primary purpose of a mobile web experience is to try and reach as many browsers as possible, having like your core menu just not work in a lot of places was not a great solution for a lot of people. So there was there was these technical constraints that came up, but then also, as we mentioned a little bit earlier, there are some preconceived, how shall I say, conventions for the web, like, the home thing at the top takes you to home. People look for things there. So that drives some stuff as well. Now, all that said, right, let me show you this. We've been experimenting with ways that doesn't have to be the case. And sometimes breaking these conventions is a little challenging, but other times it's actually quite useful. So if you look at common ways people hold their phones, right? I mentioned before kind of the one hand, one thumb. Sometimes you do two hands. Sometimes you do the crackberry prayer, as it's affectionately known. If you look at the way people use tablets, and we can talk about this, I've got some data around how they use tablets, when they do it like that. Sometimes they do it like this, how often they do it. There's a number of variances here. But on tablets, it generally creates similar hard, easy, okay surfaces. On touchscreen laptops, which are increasingly popular, you see people kind of pulling these devices towards themselves and using the bottom edges of the screen. So it's kind of, heavier interface down there. And it creates easy, okay, hard to hit targets. And systems designed to work on these touchscreen laptops, like Windows 8, sorry, I'm skipping through this, like Windows 8 and now Windows 10, they try to take advantage of these easy-to-use zones. Let me see if I got the slide on here. Yeah, like so. So in Windows 8, the application tools are down at the bottom, right? And they kind of come up. And they put commands on the right, commands on the left, so that you can put them inside of these easy-to-hit zones. So looking at this kind of comfortable to reach area, we had the same thought that you had, like, why don't we try and position the navigation on the bottom consistently across all these devices? That sounds like a pretty good idea. So the idea was, well, let's make a pattern that kind of looks like this. On a small screen phone, the navigation in the bottom, and then as we get to larger screen sizes, we'll just sort of separate it out across the board. So here's a working prototype of that. If you hit menu, it's all the way at the bottom, available when you get to the end of content. And then as you increase screen size, now we just sort of put it on the sides, right? And then as we keep increasing screen size, it stays over there. So we've certainly played with designs like this, and there have been certain UI elements that work like this, made a little bit more ubiquitous. Sorry, I'm skipping through this. Like you see this type of control happening a lot. And here. But despite that, here's another example. Despite that, it hasn't really taken off yet. And in fact, this may be my opportunity to show you that embarrassing bear slide. Was this it? Let's see. Yeah. Woohoo. Where did I put this? Here we go. So we tried to kind of change up how navigational structures worked when we were building Polar. And it was a similar sort of mindset, which was like, look, when we're talking about smartphones, people generally have this one thumb action, so we can make an interface that works well for that. When we start talking about tablets, right, this is a very common interaction pattern. So we thought, well, let's change the UI so that you have your navigation area on the left here, so you can just sort of scroll through these different things, pick one, shows up on the right, and then you can use this hand to interact with what's on the right. And then it also adapts to these kinds of screens as well. Because we knew with tablets, half the time people are in landscape mode, half the time people are in portrait mode. Cool. And then when we got to an even bigger screen size, we would just increase the gap here between that side and this side. And that would account for people using tablets in this manner and touch laptops in this manner. So the UI kind of worked like this. Right? Over on the left was this scrollable panel where you can pick things and search for them. And on the right was the thing where you could actually interact with those, vote on them, comment on them, what have you. And then we had a little prompt that allowed you to vote. And I'll skip this piece because this is not so relevant. But we had a multi-device design that kind of looked like that. And the conventional design looked like that. Right? You just sort of center everything on the screen and interact with it that way. And what happened when we built this design, we had made this area scrollable and that area scrollable. And we had left the middle area not scrollable. Well, guess what everybody tries to do? They all try to scroll in this middle area because that's what they've become so used to. Right? And so we just had bug report after bug report of people being like, well, I'm trying to scroll the page and I can't scroll it. But they weren't scrolling over here or over there. They were scrolling in the center of it. And so it's just an example of how sometimes when you try and do the right thing, you think for a couple reasons, but you end up breaking a convention. It may not actually work. And if every single website all of a sudden moved to this multi-device layout instead of this conventional layout, maybe we'd be in better shape. But I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. So good news is we were actually able to make a pretty quick fix just to make that whole thing scroll on the side. But hopefully an illustration of how sometimes conventions get in the way, and even when you're trying to do something that you think is right, it could not work. Does that answer the question, I hope?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, great. Who's next? All the way down here. Okay, it's going to be a big throw. Oh! Hey, wow. Almost came out of there.
Okay, so I would like to ask about the analytics part, like the segmentation of data and exploring the user behavior.
Okay, that sounds really deep. Before you do that, do you mind if I just use this sound effect opportunity?
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
At the beginning of your presentation, there was a chart, and you showed that the mobile app users spent 10 or 20 times
20, yep.
longer than on the mobile web.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you segment the type of the mobile app, because probably if you could exclude the gaming apps, probably the difference would be smaller.
So the question is, if you look at that data and you exclude gaming apps, the difference would be smaller. Yeah, a lot of the data actually does exclude gaming apps for those reasons. So when you look at some of these data sources, they are pulling that out. But if you actually look at where time... My mic go off? Oh, there I am. If you actually look at where time gets spent, I probably have a chart like this, and it'll categorize which different kinds of apps get which amount of time spent. Here we go. I think this works. Yeah. So this is relative time spent on various kinds of apps, on the top 25 apps, and this is from February of 2015. So if you look, gaming actually in the US has a pretty big chunk, but in other regions it's a lot smaller. And the biggest chunk across the board is social networking, followed by communication and browsing and all of those kinds of things. And it gets even more complicated when you look at some of these things, because if you look inside of social networking, you can see these questions I've thrown in here, right? So in the browser, that's about 100% viewing websites. But are they using social networking in the web browser? Open question. But if you look inside of the social networking thing, a lot of interesting stuff to talk about there, because a lot of these social networks have built-in web browser traffic, right? So if you look at iOS, and this is from 2015 Q3, you see that on iOS of web browsing traffic, about 80% comes from their default installed browser. 20% of it comes from in-app web views, things embedded inside of web apps, and most of those within there come from Facebook. This data actually got updated recently with some new stuff. This takes us to the end of 2015 and looks at like 21 billion requests. So if you look at Android, you see about half of web traffic is inside the stock browser, and then 40% is in-app web views, and 20% is different web browsers. But inside of here, almost 88% of this comes from Facebook. So looking at that, that's the second largest web browser on Android, basically. And similar story over on iOS, although third-party web browsers are much smaller on iOS, but similar sort of usage of in-app web views dominated by social networks. And sorry for the tangent there, but I just use it as an illustration to call out that things oftentimes are a little bit one level deeper than you think, right? You sort of see, oh my God, 40% of time is spent inside of social networking. I'm not a social networking app. I don't care about mobile. Well, it turns out if you're on the web, 40% of that time spent inside of social networking apps may actually be visiting web pages, including yours. So therefore, you may care.
Okay, so maybe another question.
Sure. That's why I'm here.
Okay, this one about the Google Plus app.
Yeah.
I wonder when you introduced the bottom bar menu, have you tried to measure the decrease of the burger menu usage?
We know what the usage of it is, but I don't know if we explicitly have like a number for decreased usage, like what percentage. It's certainly used much, much less than the bottom bar, but there are still functions inside of there that are important, like account switching, like settings, access to secondary services, and things like that. So we treat, I actually do have a slide on this. Let me see if I can find it. This might be it. So we don't just have one kind of navigational structure, right? We have multiple forms of navigation. So the bottom bar is what we consider to be the global navigation, the main sections, the core features, the places people go the most and really define what the service is about. We have what's behind the burger, which we call the navigation drawer. That's all about supportive navigation. So there is where you'll go to account switch, to look at your profile, to tweak your settings, to find help, these kinds of much less frequently utilized things that need to be accessible but don't need to be so prominent. And then we also have contextual navigation. So when you go to one of these sections, you're able to really quickly and easily move through the subsections of that screen, right? So there isn't like one be-all, end-all nav that solves all problems. Depending on whether it's contextual navigation, global navigation, supportive navigation, you can use different UI elements to support those different cases. And there was a nice example a little while ago, if I can find this, where, this fellow named James, I forget his last name, I can probably find it, but you'll have to forgive me for now, decided to do some A/B testing on the hamburger menu. And so he went and tested a hamburger menu against a hamburger menu with the word menu, a hamburger menu with an outline on it, and just tried to see which solution people use the most. And so he ran a couple tests, and he saw that when he added the word menu, more people actually used that feature. When he made it look like a button, a lot more people actually used that feature. And then he saw differences when he took the menu in a button, the word menu in a button with an icon, and just the word menu. So he just sort of compared what would happen if I added text explanations of this icon. And when he used text, good things happened. Not as good as when he used both. And when he got rid of the affordance to make it look like a button. He saw people fall off, which is interesting because before, when he added the button, 22% more people used it. When he removed the button, 22% less people use it. So there's 22%-ish of people who don't use things unless they look like a button. It's not actually how you can read that, but it's funny to say. Anyway, then he did this battle royale where he took the menu in a button, the word menu in the button, ran it against 250,000 unique mobile visitors and sort of saw which one wins, and menu won. So that was kind of cool to see that text is more clear than icons. Things that look like buttons usually get used more. But Booking.com wrote an article. They're like, well, we went and tested this. And when we took our hamburger icon and we put it in a button and wrote the word menu on it, we didn't really see any kind of impact on the behavior of our users. It turns out, however, when you look at what is inside the hamburger menu on Booking.com, it's things like changing your currency, picking a language, right? And all of these sort of supportive navigation functions, which, that's fine. That's what we have in our burger too. You put these sort of supportive navigation things. They're not core to the app, and it's okay. And they made a point that says you're testing these things against a very specific user base in a very specific scenario. What works for you may not work for us. That is absolutely true. I still think they could have done a little better if they kind of changed the design to make the things match. But anyway, separate issue. So it's not that the burger in itself is bad. It's if Booking.com has like core services such as search, or deals or whatever, stuff that's important to their users and their business, they may want to give them more visibility than that burger menu affords. And the other thing about context, people asked about using this burger menu on the desktop, right? There certainly is a decent amount of visibility for the burger icon here, but what about here? How well does that really translate to a larger screen size? And mobile amplifies the presence of things based on the virtue of the smaller screen. I made a point of this recently. Let me see if I can find this image. Whoa. Sorry, I warned you about this, right? Here we go. I'm actually doing pretty good. What do you think leads to more unsubscribes from mailing lists? The iOS 10 mail implementation or the Gmail desktop implementation? Any hypotheses? iOS. Why do we say that? Because it's like huge on there, right? Physically, the lettering is actually not that much bigger, the actual image, right? And this one's got an underline and what have you. But because of the smaller screen real estate and maybe the text on top, the messages from a mailing list, the action here gets a lot more amplified than it does on the big screen. Right, so it's another thing to think about. Bless you, bless you. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, who's back there? All right, let's see if we can go 4 for 4. Yes. I was close, though.
Yeah. I have 2 questions, actually.
Yeah.
You talked about web and app this morning, but I'm really curious what your view is on the rise of chat apps and conversational UI, and also mobile design in that. And the second one is, what would your idea be of using web views or an app within conversational UI?
Yeah, I had this is kind of, well, I'm not going to try finding it. But recently I posted a thing that says, a web browser embedded inside of a chatbot in a native app inside of a mobile operating system inside of my pocket. Right? Like these are the levels of depth that we've gone to. And there are now platforms that will allow you to embed the web inside of conversational interfaces. I think that speaks to the web's ubiquity. Just like it gets embedded in a web browser view inside of a native app, it can get embedded inside of a chat app as well. But one of the things that conversational interfaces are challenged by, I think, is currently efficiency. And if you look at the bulk of them, they still really rely on visual cues to help you make forward progress. You'll say something, it'll actually come back with a GUI menu of choices for you to pick from. And what it's essentially done is broken those down into a series of linear steps. If what you provide makes a lot of sense as linear steps, then it can make a lot of sense. If the experience you provide is really non-linear and exploratory, then that UI can really suffer, right? Like, show me a shirt. Here's 3 shirts. Okay, that doesn't really work so well. So as with a lot of new technologies, we still have a lot to figure out. And with things like conversational UIs and one of the points that I always like to make when talking about mobile, if I can come back to this, and I guess this is a little older. Let me see if I got the newer version of this. That says 2016, doesn't it? Yeah. So when we look at kind of the history of the personal computer, we've had roughly, come on, there's the PC. We've had roughly 31 years of desktop graphical user interface computing. If you chart it back to this little guy, right? This little guy came out around the 80s, and it had this paradigm of using computers that was attached to a keyboard and a precise cursor and mouse. And with it, we built interfaces that work with that kind of input method. So we've got windows, we've got icons that have little hover controls that support keyboard commands. We've got menus that support keyboard commands that work on hovers. There's little pointers, right? There's this whole system built for using keyboards and cursors to get things done. And so for 30 years, the interface has kind of been something like this. And that's been super entrenched in our brains because we stay on those devices all day and night, and it gets stuck. Smartphones and tablets, depending on where you start counting, right? Maybe this should be updated to 9 years, have been around for a lot less. And so with mobile, I always made the point that there's still lots to learn, but there's also lots of things to unlearn. And if you trace kind of where we are in the evolution of mobile compared to where we are in the evolution of chat interfaces, we've had way less time even there to figure things out. And again, very likely that what we're doing is applying the lessons or the learnings we have now for mobile to a new platform. But that may not necessarily be the right thing to do. And let's hope this works. It's always a risk to open a deck. Nope, that didn't work. We'll try one more. Fingers crossed. And it's going to load. At some point, my machine will crash from having 5,000 slides open. And I apologize in advance for that. But I have a little thing here around how we generally try to apply the same models to what came before. Right? So if you look at the transition from, say, radio over to TV, right? There were business models, there were formats, and there were things that worked in radio that when TV came around, everybody just tried to move it over to TV. The whole notion of a sponsor, right? Somebody who sponsored the radio program translated into advertising. Spokesmen were literally people who spoke for a product. And if you look at the first round of TV programs, a lot of them were originally from radio. They just sort of ported them over. And when they ported these programs over from radio to TV, they kind of looked like this. The big innovation was a poster that used the visual element. And it took us a while to figure out what TV is really good at. Right, to kind of find the depth of the medium. It wasn't apparently clear that radio is not TV. Similarly, We've been using print metaphors for the web for years. We call things pages. We use grid layouts. We focus on typography. We put the same kind of ads on web pages that we had inside of magazines and newspapers because why not, right? That's what worked before. But the web is not print, just like desktop and mobile are not the same thing. And it feels like an awkward process, but it's actually, I think, a very natural process. Our first inclination is to copy, and then we gradually extend things, and then we finally find this new form. It takes a while to get rid of all of these paradigms, right? And when we do, big things can happen, and so on and so forth. But I always come back to this mode of thinking when talking about things like chat interfaces or VR or augmented reality or any of these kinds of things. People oftentimes want answers, but it's going to take time to figure out, and it's very, very likely that the first things we do there are going to be the wrong things. Cool. Who's next? Okay, back there.
Yes, hello.
Hello.
I had a question about the progressive web apps that we talked about yesterday. And taking back your slide on the graph explaining rich and reach, I was wondering, have we found the holy grail that will make us rich with reach? Or by doing both, will we have nothing? So it would be great if we could have a bit, it's as well the future. Maybe your vision on that, and if you would have any advice on companies that are now, with the presentation of yesterday, considering if we should action upon it.
Yeah, so let me see if I have this thing. Web application. So let me see if this comes up. Now you can see how I search things. But, okay, so back in 2005, we went and looked at all these different web application solutions, right? And we made this, oh man, what? Oh, come on, internet. You know what? I think I know what the problem is here. I'm going to blame Amazon hosting. Bam. We made this solutions guide to what's going on with web applications. And the whole premise was people were trying to bridge the gap between this accessible, quote unquote, thin client and this really rich client. Remember Java, ActiveX, all these kinds of things in the browser? Right? This has been an ongoing thing for many, many years, where people try to bring access and rich interactions together. And I think the fundamental problem is once you start making things richer, you start limiting access, and therefore you're working against yourself. While there's a lot of awesome innovation happening in web standards, and a lot of people are trying to push the envelope, all of that innovation comes at a cost of access. It's not available until the latest browser. You can't get it on this platform. It only works this way over here, and things like this. And so the two things are kind of working against each other. However, I think the model of progressive enhancement, which progressive web apps are actually great at, is a great way to build for the internet. And let me see if I can find a nice example of what I mean there. I probably got one over here. Yeah, let's see. Okay, here we go. Here's a nice little example. So when you're on a mobile web browser, we can just give you a picture of a map and then have a big button that says View Map. And that View Map can go open your native Maps application. So it's just an image. It loads real fast. And then as we get to a larger screen size, we can replace that image with an embedded map where you can scroll around, you can zoom, and what have you. So on the small screen, just a picture with a button that goes to an app. And as you get to a larger screen size, we will replace and progressively enhance that element to do something better. And this philosophy is a great way to think about some of these new advances, right? So you can basically give somebody a checkout form, But if they have the ability to do one click with their thumbprint or retina or whatever, right, then allow that. And so you can take advantage of some of this new stuff without limiting the access that people get elsewhere. And the way a lot of these responsive solutions and these sort of progressive solutions get made is they start out from this base layer, right? They start out from, let me see if this is a good image for this or not. It could be. They start out with these basic defaults, and then they sort of look to see what's supported, and then they start to make enhancements based on the capabilities of their device. So these folks get really basic stuff, these folks get enhanced stuff, and it just sort of scales upward as you go. Does that make sense?
Definitely.
Yeah, and by the way, I do think a lot of the things that were showed from progressive web apps are going to be a big deal, especially the payment stuff. You know, we know for a fact that the hurdles for getting through checkout forms and things like this are a huge deal. And even little things that you do to reduce those gaps go a really long way. I think I actually have a whole deck here around optimizing mobile checkout flows. But I also have, let's see if I can find this, you know, some examples of the impact, right? So if you go from this multi-screen setup flow to this single one, and you support some different things, so you cut out 11 less input fields, you can get a 34% increase in completions and conversions, decrease in sign-up times, and the like. So there's a lot of optimizations that can happen, and one of the key things that helped some of these optimizations is the support of one-click payment services, right? And by the way, I can get this down to 4 inputs, so yay me. Here's some other things, like inline address setup, simpler credit card setup. So you can see inline validation for credit card addresses, inline validation for emails, input masks for credit card inputs, all those things together, smart defaults. And this particular thing had a 9% increase in conversions, but who knows what it was like before then. So 22 fields, so on and so forth. So lots of stuff you can do to improve it, and consistently I've seen the more you reduce the processes of collecting payment info, the better those conversions work. And so stuff like, all right, we've already got your wallet, tap once here, goes a really long way. Okay. Question answered? Yes?
Yes.
Who's next?
I wish there was a sound effect for it.
Oh, sound effect? Oh, sorry. I apologize profusely. Let's see what I got. Does this have a sound effect? No, I didn't used to do sound effects. Oh, this has a sound effect. Cool. No, it's not as good as the bear one, is it? Kind of like the bear one. Let's do that one again. This one's just so cute.
That was the one.
Okay. Anybody? That's all we got? You're all satisfied? Nobody has anything else they want to talk about? Oh, okay. See, that changes things. So over there, and then we'll go over there. Throw it up right there. Yeah. All right. Still nobody hurt.
Hey, I had a question regarding the taking away the bottom bar and once you're starting to scroll.
Yeah.
What are your gestures to like retrieve the?
Oh, to bring it back? Yeah. So let me see if I can. I think I got a video of this. Where is that? So what we ended up doing in all those cases is looking pretty carefully at timing for removing that. Because what happens is as you scroll, you have to wait for the appropriate amount of time before those things actually disappear. And where did I put it? So I think I have a video of it being animated. 1 second. Maybe it's in a totally different deck. Yeah, let's go over here. Yeah, this works. So I think you can see it in this video. So let's see, when you start scrolling, does it go away? Oh no, it doesn't go away in this one. The top one goes away. So again, if you come back, you can see like as you start to scroll down, watch that top bar fade away. And there'll be a moment when you can bring it back in half a second after we get through this piece. But like the timing around when you bring it back and push it forward actually requires some iteration. Because if you do it too soon, then it can feel kind of jitterish. And if you don't bring it in soon enough, then people get confused about where it is. So I think once we do a couple skips here, we'll see at least the top bar coming back in this one. And here we go. See how it came down right there? Like not immediately, but after a little bit of delay, so you can still make your way through some content. But when you go a certain level, that's when we actually pull it back in.
Your experience on doing that on the bottom bar? Is it like
Yeah, same sort of story there, right? You have to give it a bit of scrolling because again, remember my whole point around gestures are sloppy. Right, so you can't be so precise that a little flick up means I want the nav. You have to wait until it's like a kind of gesture, and then you bring it up. Like once somebody's moved an adequate distance up the stream. So we do the same thing with the bottom bar and the tab bar. And with a lot of those interactions, we actually time the two of them together, right? So when one comes in, the other one comes in, so you're not getting an inconsistent experience.
Thank you.
Yep, and I probably have a video of that somewhere, but I have no idea where I put it. I can find it. Yes, okay, so yeah, it's right there.
There's a couple of slides you presented where I'm trying to figure out the relative difference between them. One is when you're navigating on smartphones and then moving into phablets, there's this area of ease of use and the complex ease of use, which makes me believe that most people navigate with one finger, with the thumb finger, I suppose. But then you've got this other slide that talks about, well, maybe you should look at things a bit about two fingers, like having two fingers at the same time where you can move things left, right. Now, how many people are actually on a mobile device using two fingers for any gesture at all?
That's a great question. Let's talk about that. Because I actually have slides about that, I think. They're somewhere. If anybody, by the way, wants to build a system for finding slides, I will pay you money. You can come over and I will use it. So let's see here. This will help us. Here. But I actually have another one that builds on this a bit. So let us find that, and then we'll be real happy. Okay, 1 second. This is going to be the one that saves the day. Cool. So, I swear it's in here. Oh, come on. Okay, one more. Sorry. Don't hate me. Okay, here we go. So here's an answer to that question. So as I mentioned, there's a couple different ways people hold smartphones, right? One hand, two hand, three hand. And my friend Stephen Huber went and did an analysis of people out in the wild using this, and he kind of looked at what % of people use what kind of grip on smartphones. He saw about 50% were using this one-handed grip, about 36% were using this form, and around 15% were using this form. And this was from like 1,300 observations, now about maybe 2 or 3 years old, so maybe phablets have changed this a little bit. The stats I showed earlier today are a bit more up to date, but they don't cover this whole spectrum. The interesting thing, though, is you can take away from this, okay, 50% of the time people are using a thumb, but if you break down that middle section and you say, well, what kind of two-handed use are we talking about? You'll see that 72% of the time what they did was they were like this, and they just kind of put another finger on the screen, but the thumb was still there. And then only 28% of the time did they actually switch fingers. Right, so two-handed use doesn't necessarily mean the thumb's not there. Two-handed use may very well mean something like this. And it takes a bit for two-handed use to change into another digit. And so if you look at it that way, and you add the 50% plus this percentage breakdown, 3/4 of the time you're dealing with the thumb on the screen, which is why I think it's important to sort of design for that kind of perspective. You know, that sort of use case with a thumb on the device. And by the way, you don't need all these different analyses. Here's a video of me stalking a lady on an airplane. And what you can see is exactly this kind of behavior I'm talking about, right? Scroll, 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 and then she sees a little thing, and she's going to try to tap it. And notice where she just put her other hand, right? Two-handed now, but still on the thumb, tap, 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 tap. Ah, hell, forget it. But so if you just like watch people in the wild, you see this behavior. So this was really clearly what I was illustrating before. She's got kind of the thumb moving through it. When she's trying to reach an area higher up on the screen, she'll put another hand on, but it's another thumb, and she's still using that kind of large digit, the thumb, to try and make her way through it. So does that clarify the...
I guess
Yep.
the question is is there any use for having two fingers at the same time doing something? Like,
is there any use for doing two-finger gestures?
Exactly, yeah. Or three.
Oh, yeah,
fingers.
yeah.
You had the slide we had 2 fingers, 3 fingers, but most people
Totally.
use one, right?
Yeah, so there's reasons for doing two-finger, three-finger gestures. The thing you want to avoid is having the same gesture do different things just because of the inclusion of another finger, right? And this is where people go awry. If you've got like a button or some sort of action, and tapping it with one finger does something totally different than tapping it with a different finger, chances are people will be making a mistake and have two fingers on the screen. So you don't want to completely change what a UI element does when you've got more than one digit on it. Using multi-finger gestures is totally cool, as I was talking about with like those swipe gestures, the pinch, the spread, and all those sorts of fun gestures. Those are all totally legitimate. In fact, there's a whole range of these kinds of gestures. And where do I have that? It's probably in this deck. There's a whole range of those kinds of gestures that are available to you as vocabulary, right? So where did I put some of those things? Somewhere in here, there's a whole bunch of stuff on the different kinds of gestures you can make use of and how. But yeah, totally fair game. Just be really mindful of the sloppiness of fingers and don't have precision that's like, okay, only one finger allowed. Cool. All right, there was a question over here before. Yep, I'll throw that over there.
So yesterday during presentation on AMP, we were also shown a concept of universal login.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, do you think this will actually get us to a point where forcing a mobile user to log in won't be a problem and we'll be able to stitch both mobile and desktop?
Oh God, I hope. That would be so awesome. So one of the things when people talk about conversion optimization, and I think I have a really nice picture of this, I hope. Right, it's like, so actually here's a nice example. So Amazon, who's a company that's been doing lots of things, and I'll just sort of build this because I don't think the build is actually going to work, but realizes the problem of people logging in with passwords. If you've ever done passwords and accounts, you know they're sort of a mixed blessing. The assumption is, oh yeah, password's going to get return users to go in and complete the flow later, so we need to make everybody to make an account. The problem is people end up with multiple accounts, they forget how they log in, they fall out of the purchase funnel, and bad things happen. So companies that care about getting return users really care about making sure people get logged in. And so Amazon, originally you couldn't view your password, and they did this tap a button to show your password, then they did reveal by default, tap to hide your password, then they do this reveal your password below, and now at least on iOS, all you got to do is put your thumb on the screen to go and buy something. And they didn't stop there. Inside of one of their more recent updates, they now have this ability for you to, let me see if I have this, to buy with a swipe. Has anybody seen this? Where you just swipe across the screen to make a purchase. Where is it? Oh, I hope I can find it to illustrate it for you. Maybe I don't have it in here. But you essentially just get this little thing where you scroll across, you swipe your finger across, and that's how you confirm that you're going to buy something. So there's all these efforts to lower the barrier of effort required to purchase. And the example I really love to show is on Uber. So the example on the left is the Uber sign-up form on a mobile web browser, right? And it's the typical thing, account password, profile, so your name, last name, mobile number, payment info, credit card, expiration date, terms, pretty standard stuff. And given that they're Uber, I bet they've tried to optimize this as much as they can. But bottom line is it's a form where you fill out a bunch of stuff and you type it in, what have you. On the right is the experience they released with Apple Pay. So when you have the app, all you do is put your finger on the Touch ID sensor, and a car comes. And you paid for it. And you create an account with just that. Right? So for a while, I've been making the point, like, this is the new bar for checkout. Once you do this, once you get something by just putting your thumb on a button, like, why would you ever want to go back to that? You never want to, right? So this staying logged in thing, this instant checkout stuff, it's huge. And aspirationally, I think the more we can get there, the better, right? Because like I say, you tell me what the future looks like. Does the future look like optimizing one of those form elements? Does the future look like something like this? And I think one of the speakers, maybe it was the person from Dropbox, I forget his name, apologize, but he was talking about using tests to do more dramatic things, right? We can certainly use the tests to determine whether or not we should put an asterisk on the credit card number or not. And you may get like a 2%, 5% bump or something like that. Or we can do tests like this, like what happens if we get rid of the form entirely and utilize a service like Apple Pay or Android Pay or some of the other authentication services that are out there. Now, companies don't like to do some of these things because they feel they lose the customer relationship. We need the info about the customer because we need to send them emails that now they can unsubscribe from with one tap. But I think there's a balance there. And long term, how sustainable is it to try and do everything yourself, right? I don't know how sustainable it is. And so you sort of have to think about what are the advantages I want to take from platforms and what am I willing to sort of cede in order to get those advantages and balance out stuff that way. But to me, this is like, just a great example of how far you can go with this. And I made a joke yesterday on the panel for those of you that were here. People complain, oh, my conversion rate's 200% lower on mobile and desktop. And I said, well, it's 400% lower on the smartwatch. But, do people buy things with this? Absolutely. If anybody's actually used some of the payment systems that come on this stuff, they're pretty nice, right? And long term, if you can just have some sort of identification thing on you that's either registered to your heartbeat. Has anybody seen the NIMI band? So the NIMI band is like a little authentication bracelet you wear that uses your unique heart signature to identify you. And then it has a communicator, I don't know if it's Bluetooth or whatever, so that you can authenticate purchases. So basically, you just have this thing on your wrist, and you can go be authenticated as yourself wherever you are. Which is A, pretty cool from a convenience perspective, but B, pretty cool because if you're dead, it doesn't work. It's not like somebody can cut off your thumb and go do stuff or rip out your eye and do stuff. They have to keep you alive. So I really like it for that. I think it's pretty neat. But ultimately, oh, and actually here's another really kind of fun slide just to sort of push the thinking. There was this thing called Coin, which would put all of your credit cards inside of a credit card-like device. Like it's the future of buying. Well, what's more likely to replace your wallet? Maybe the thing that replaces your wallet is a wristwatch, as opposed to a thing that looks like a wallet and scans like a wallet. And I'm not saying this thing is the future of buying by any means, but I hope it illustrates that point I was making earlier. This is like applying the previous model, right? Whereas this one is taking a different model. And these are harder to make work because people have a harder on-ramp with it, if you will. These may be more gradual, but sometimes they're too gradual. And so the secret sauce of innovation is finding that line in between, like not pushing so far that you freak people out, like Google Glass perhaps, or not going so close to what exists today to not create enough value to get you away from the thing that exists today. Yeah, and we'll see how Snapchat does with their version of Google Glass. That will be really interesting. The spectacles, have anybody seen those? Snapchat's thing? Would anybody wear those? No? I don't know. It's fascinating to me. I'm really curious as to how that's going to play out because it's a totally different audience and a totally different mindset. And I think I have a picture of the NIMI band in here somewhere. Is this it? No. I thought I had it in here to show you. One more slide deck and I'll see. In time. One more, and I promise I'll quit. Oh, hey, this is cool, though. Sorry, should I not do that? Okay. More questions? Yes. Let's throw it over there. Ooh.
Almost.
Close, yeah.
I had a question relating to more from an e-commerce perspective. When you have a big product catalog with quite a complex structure of categorization, do you have any what you see as good cases on working with more complex structures, but also, for instance, with faceted navigation in a mobile environment?
Yeah. So let's see here. I think I got something in here around some of that. So the problem that you run into with a lot of those multi-level sort of, oh, by the way, hey, look, sorry, I found it. Remember I was talking about that swipe to place your order UI? By the way, it's one of these little sheets that comes up from the bottom. Remember we were talking about those in the earlier session? So it sort of comes up from the bottom, the big areas, they're closable. And again, from a comfort of ergonomics perspective, so you hit the button, the thing comes up, you just swipe across or tap up here and you're done. You buy. So another example of using those kinds of form factors to change the kind of common behaviors. So I have in here a couple examples of, here we go. Some of these things will show you. So I think one of the problems that you run into is when you have just sort of this bland list, if you will. And what I mean by bland is that it's just hierarchy after hierarchy after hierarchy after hierarchy. Let me see if I can build this slide. Okay. Right, like this kind of one hierarchical thing next to the hierarchical thing. There's a lot of opportunities by which you can change that experience and help people make more logical movements through it. So as an example here, if you take that and you render it like this, within each subcategory, reference subcategory search, so you can make your way out of there really quickly. You can merchandise things underneath here. You can kind of treat the all category as a browsable path, so you don't have to go down to a leaf node, right? You can sort of pause your browsing at any category and make that an accessible thing. And then you can still offer some of these sub-browsing things, but here's like 3 different ways to get you out of that hierarchical browse system to get you to something more interesting and relevant. Here's another sort of variant on a similar theme, is we could just have a navigational structure with no information about what's behind it, what's next, or we could render it with some data that actually makes each of these sections much clearer. So you know what's happening in accounts. So here's how much cash you have. Here's how much debt. What's happening in the budgets. Here's how you're doing. Here's cash. So that there's some more information behind each tap to allow you to know whether or not it's worth your time to go and make that tap. All right, so those are a couple ways to adjust from just these bland, flat navigational areas, and there's others available as well. Some things are just hierarchical, but you don't want to lock people into just this. And I think I got a great example of this, actually, of the negative. So those are some of the positive versions of that. I think I have some negative versions of that, if I may find them somewhere in my long list of slides that I have made for you all, and I cannot. Oh, I'm getting close. Please tell me this is it. Oh, sweet. So let's say you're on JCPenney and you'd like to shop. So how do you shop? Well, let's tap the shop button. What would you like to shop for? I think I would like to shop for the home. What would you like to shop for the home? I believe I would like to shop for furniture for the home. What sort of furniture would you like to shop for the home? I would like to shop for living room furniture for the home. What sort of living room furniture would you like to shop for the home? I would like to shop for sofa. Oh, thank God. Right, I think that's the thing you want to avoid with these browse paths, which is why I was kind of pointing out this sort of structure. Cool.
But then what about filtering? So because now you say, okay, maybe more not going through all the full hierarchy, so then you'll end up in products probably more quickly.
Yeah.
Then you want to get to the right product.
Yeah, so I will point you to, rather than answering this too deeply, I'll point you to a couple experiences that Rachel Hinman lays out in Mobile Frontier for this premise of mobile unfolding. So she has a couple patterns called the nested doll, which I can sort of show you how that functions. That's the linear one. There's these hub and spoke patterns, which work a little bit differently. There are bento box patterns, there's filtered view patterns, and a couple other patterns in there, which are all around how on a small screen can you allow people to go deeper and find the things that they're looking for. Right, so yeah, as you can see, there's a lot of different ways to sort of crack this kind of nut on the small screen. Okay, I think we are down to only 3 minutes. Sorry. Did that go fast, or was it just me? So who has a really burning question? Like a super duper burning one. Okay, I just see one back there. So let's throw the box as far as we can. And this will have to be our last question for the day. Oh, and it didn't work for the last one. That's okay. Oh!
Okay.
Wow. That's all right.
Good. Hi. So
Hi.
I really like the content you presented around drilling deep to find end content or product information with category navigation. But how about search? So let's say user enters probably a vague query, say like Apple, for example, and Apple could be like Apple devices, or it could be actually the fruit. Like, how would you recommend segmenting content in a way that it's useful to the user or helps him find what he's actually looking for?
So I hear there's a whole company that does search somewhere out there, and it's complicated, but in general, there's some high-level things that make a lot of sense, which is generally people are not as good at pre-filtering their queries as they are to post-filtering their queries, if that makes a lot of sense. So at a very broad level, what you want to do for pre-queries is allow them to get services like autocomplete that save them steps and get them to what a valid query could be. as opposed to trying to segment the query during the point they're putting it in, right? So like, as you're writing Apple, you don't want to necessarily be like, did you mean Apple the computer? Did you mean this? And giving them 15 different choices. You just want to get the query out of them. Then when you bring them to the results experience, that's where filtering makes a ton of sense, because then they see the scope of the results and the filtering has more context. It's like, oh, okay, there's a lot of these kinds of things. Now I can figure out where I want to go. So don't try to do it all up front. Use up front for trying to get them to a valid query quickly, save them typing, those kinds of things, and save the results page for doing the deeper filtering, analysis, and that kind of stuff. Cool. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate all the great questions. And thanks for hanging out with me for so long. I wonder if I have another sound effect thing. I don't know if this one counts. Has this one got a sound effect? All right, not as good. Sorry. But thank you all and appreciate it.